As a pastor, I was blackmailed by someone in my church to steal $200,000 from the church account to hide a secret affair I had with a church member. When I refused, the blackmailer exposed my secret and the church fired me in disgrace. They called me a liar, a hypocrite, and condemned me to public shame. You won't believe who the blackmailer was. My entire life changed suddenly on a quiet Tuesday morning, the 14th of June, 2022. I was sitting at my study table when I received a message from a private number. Attached to it were incriminating photos and a long video of me with a woman I had an affair with 3 years ago. The images were so damaging that if they were ever made public, my career as a pastor, and even my marriage, would be ruined. 5 minutes after receiving the message, I got a phone call from the same private number. The voice on the other end was clear and bold. It sounded like the person was using a voice-changing app. He asked if I understood what would happen if the pictures and video were leaked. I told him I did. He then demanded that I transfer $200,000 from church funds to a cryptocurrency wallet. The blackmailer gave me 1 week to do it. I replied to the message, begging the person not to go through with it, but they wouldn't back down. I told them I didn't even know how to make a cryptocurrency transaction. They said they would guide me through converting the cash into Bitcoin and making the transfer. The blackmailer clearly warned me not to tell anyone, especially the police. He said I had until the following Sunday morning to complete the transfer, or else he would release the pictures and video online. The threat was clear: pay up or have my deepest shame exposed to everyone I loved. At that moment, I had no idea this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would test every belief I held dear. But before I go further to tell you how it all played out, let me start from the beginning so that you can get the full story of how my world came crashing down. My name is Reverend Alistair Finch, and I'm 78 years old. For over 2 decades, I poured my heart and soul into Ebenezer Chapel in Waynesville, North Carolina. This small mountain town church wasn't just my job or my calling. It was my family, my purpose, my entire world wrapped up in one sacred place. The church building sat on a hill overlooking the valley, its white steeple reaching toward heaven like a finger pointing the way home. Every Sunday, I watched families fill those wooden pews, their faces glowing with faith and trust. Children played in the aisles before service started. Elderly members shared stories of decades spent in those same seats. Young couples planned their weddings in our sanctuary. I lived with my wife Genevieve in the pastoral residence right next to the church grounds. Our children, Tobin and Mercy, had grown up playing in the church basement and helping with Sunday school. This place wasn't just where I worked, it was where my family had built our entire life together. That Tuesday morning started like any other day in my routine. I arrived at my study early to prepare for the week ahead. The morning light streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across my desk. Books lined every wall, filled with decades of sermon notes and theological wisdom. A small porcelain shepherd figurine sat on my desk, a gift from a missionary friend years ago. I was reviewing Sunday's sermon when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The pictures on the screen made my blood run cold. I saw photographs of a moment I tried to forget and cover up for 3 years. A moment of weakness with a woman named Celeste who used to attend our church. 3 years ago, I had made a terrible mistake. This was during a particularly difficult time in my marriage. I had fallen into temptation with Celeste. It was a brief affair that lasted only a few weeks. The guilt ate at me for months afterward. I confessed to God, begged for forgiveness, and pleaded with Celeste to keep our secret buried. She agreed and left the church shortly after, and I thought that chapter of my life was closed forever. The message was direct and chilling. The blackmailer wanted $200,000 transferred from church accounts before the following Sunday. If I refused, photographs and videos would be leaked online and sent to every member of Ebenezer Chapel. My reputation would be destroyed. My family would be shamed. My life's work would crumble into dust. I sat in that study for hours, staring at those words on my phone screen. My mind raced through every possible solution. Could I somehow raise the money without stealing from the church? Could I find out who was behind this before they followed through on their threat? Could I confess everything and hope for mercy? The afternoon sun was setting when I finally made my decision. I would not steal from the church I loved. I would not let a blackmailer control my life through fear and shame. I would tell the truth, starting with the people who mattered most. I didn't tell anyone about what was happening, but it deeply troubled me. I tried to keep it to myself, but I wasn't doing a good job hiding it. On Wednesday of that same week, my wife Genevieve noticed something was wrong and asked what was bothering me. I brushed it off and told her it was just church-related stress. Deep down, I had already decided to confess everything to my family, but I didn't know how to begin or what to say. Then, the blackmailer sent me another message, warning that time was running out and I needed to make the transfer. I chose to ignore the message. During the evening of the next day, being Thursday, I gathered my family in our living room for the hardest conversation of my life. Genevieve sat on our old floral couch, her gentle eyes studying my face with growing concern. Our children, Tobin and Mercy, both grown adults now, sensed the weight of what was coming. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked away the seconds like a countdown to devastation. I told them everything. About my affair with Celeste 3 years ago. About the blackmail message. About my decision to confess publicly rather than steal from the church. The words felt like broken glass coming out of my mouth, each one cutting deeper than the last. Genevieve's face went through every emotion a human heart can hold. Shock gave way to hurt, hurt gave way to tears, and tears gave way to a pain so deep I could see it in her bones. She didn't say a word for the longest time. She just sat there, staring at her hands folded in her lap. Tobin's jaw clenched tight as he processed what his father had just confessed. His respect for me, built over decades of seeing me as a moral leader, cracked like ice under pressure. Mercy covered her face with her hands and wept quietly, the sound breaking my heart into 1,000 pieces. The disappointment in their eyes hurt worse than any public shame could ever bring. These were the people who loved me most in the world, and I had shattered their trust with my past mistakes and present crisis. But I knew they deserved to hear it from me before the whole world found out. I explained my plan to confess everything to the congregation that coming Sunday. I would tell them about my past sin, about the blackmail attempt, and about my refusal to steal church money to protect my reputation. I hoped that honesty and transparency might save some small piece of my ministry and my family's standing in the community. Genevieve finally looked up at me with tears streaming down her cheeks. She asked me why I had never told her about the affair before. She asked me how I could have lived with this secret for 3 whole years. She asked me if there were other secrets I was keeping from her. I answered every question as honestly as I could. I told her about the guilt that had eaten at me every single day. I told her about the prayers I had prayed asking for forgiveness. I told her that Celeste was the only woman I had ever been unfaithful with during our 40-year marriage. My family needed time to process everything I had shared with them. Tobin left that night without saying goodbye. Mercy hugged me before she went home, but her embrace felt different somehow. Genevieve went to bed early, leaving me alone in our living room with my thoughts and fears. Friday passed in a blur of sermon preparation and church duties. I tried to act normal around the congregation members I encountered, knowing that everything would change after Sunday's morning service. The weight of my secret felt heavier now that my family knew the truth. Saturday morning brought a phone call that changed everything once again. My phone rang at 6 in the morning, jolting me awake from restless sleep. The voice on the other end was panicked and familiar. It was Elder Caldwell, my personal assistant and most trusted confidant in the church. Elder Caldwell was calling to tell me something terrible had happened. I asked him to tell me what had happened, and he said that a member of the church had shared pictures and a video of me with a woman who wasn't my wife in the church group chat. This member claimed they got the pictures and video from an online gossip blog. The blackmailer had struck early. I was planning to make my confession by Sunday, but they had released the photographs and video online. Every member of Ebenezer Chapel had woken up to images of my shame filling their phone screens. The damage was already done. Elder Caldwell's voice shook as he described the reaction from church members. People were calling him all morning, demanding answers and expressing their outrage. Some were calling for my immediate removal from the pulpit. Others were threatening to leave the church entirely if I remained as pastor. I thanked Elder Caldwell for the warning and hung up the phone. The battle I had hoped to fight on my own terms was already lost. Perhaps the blackmailer had decided that my planned confession wasn't enough. They wanted maximum damage and complete humiliation for me and my family. Now, before we proceed, it's very important to say that if you're enjoying this story, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. By liking, subscribing, and even leaving a short comment of where you are watching from, you are helping me grow this channel so that other seniors like you can find this video and learn the graceful wisdom tips that it offers. I share real stories from elders who face tough situations just like this. These stories aren't just for entertainment, they're meant to help us learn and grow wiser as seniors. We can sometimes become vulnerable, and that's why it's so important to learn from the experiences and mistakes of others. Together we can protect ourselves and protect each other through shared wisdom. Now, back to our story. Sunday morning arrived like a funeral march. I had planned to stand before my congregation and confess my sins with dignity and honesty. Instead, I woke up to find my pastoral career already dead and buried by anonymous photographs shared in the darkness of night. The church parking lot told the whole story before I even stepped inside the building. Cars were scattered everywhere, parked at odd angles, as if people had rushed to get inside and share their shock with fellow members. Groups of congregants stood in small circles, their voices low and urgent as they discussed the scandal that had rocked our peaceful church community. I walked through those familiar doors knowing it would likely be my last time entering as their pastor. The sanctuary that had felt like home for 20 years now felt cold and unwelcoming. Faces that had smiled at me for decades now turned away when I tried to make eye contact. The church board had called an emergency meeting for that morning before regular service time. I sat at the long wooden table where I had planned budgets, discussed ministry programs, and prayed with these same people for 2 decades. Now they sat across from me like judges preparing to deliver a verdict. Elder Morrison, the board chairman, spoke first. His voice was formal and distant, nothing like the warm conversations we had shared over countless church dinners and community events. He informed me that the board had met by phone early that morning to discuss the situation and their response. The decision was swift and final. I was immediately suspended from all pastoral duties pending a full investigation into my conduct. They would be taking back the church car that I had used for pastoral visits and community outreach. My family would need to vacate the pastoral residence within 2 weeks to make room for an interim pastor. Elder Caldwell sat at the far end of the table, his face showing what appeared to be genuine sadness about the whole situation. He spoke up to say that while my actions were disappointing, he hoped the church could find a way to handle this matter with grace and forgiveness. But the other board members were not interested in grace at that moment. They were focused on damage control and protecting the church's reputation in the community. Someone mentioned concerns about legal liability if I had been involved in other inappropriate relationships over the years. The regular worship service was canceled that morning. Instead, the congregation gathered for what they called a time of prayer and discussion about the church's future direction. I was not invited to participate in this meeting about my own ministry and the community I had served faithfully. I drove home in silence, my mind struggling to process how quickly 20 years of ministry had collapsed into nothing. The house that had been our family sanctuary now felt like a temporary shelter with an eviction notice hanging over our heads. Genevieve was waiting for me in the kitchen when I walked through the door. She had spent the morning fielding phone calls from church members, some offering support but many expressing their disappointment and anger. Our phone had been ringing constantly since the photographs and videos appeared in the church WhatsApp group. The cruelest calls came from people who had been closest to our family over the years. Church members who had shared holiday meals at our table now questioned everything about my character and integrity. Some suggested that Genevieve should leave me to protect her own reputation in the community. But something deep inside me refused to accept this outcome as the final word on my story. Yes, I had made a terrible mistake 3 years ago. Yes, I had kept that mistake secret from my wife and congregation. But I had not stolen money from the church when given the chance. Someone had orchestrated this destruction with careful planning and perfect timing. They had waited until I confessed to my family and planned to confess publicly before striking with maximum impact. This felt personal in a way that simple blackmail for money would not have felt. I began to suspect that my blackmailer knew me better than a stranger seeking easy cash would know me. They understood my character well enough to predict that I would choose confession over theft. They had timed their attack to cause the most possible damage to my reputation and my family's future. The days following my removal from Ebenezer Chapel blurred together in a haze of anger, shame, and growing determination. I had lost everything that defined my identity for 20 years, but something inside me refused to accept defeat. The blackmailer had won the first battle, but the war for truth was far from over. My investigation began with the most obvious suspect. Celeste had been my partner in the original sin that made this blackmail possible. Perhaps years of guilt and resentment had finally pushed her to seek revenge against me. Maybe she needed money and saw my vulnerability as an opportunity to cash in on our shared secret. I reported the blackmail case to the police station, and fortunately, a detective there was a member of my church. He showed sympathy for my situation when I explained how the blackmailer tried to get me to steal church funds for them, but I refused. I convinced Detective Albright to help me track down Celeste's current address. She had moved to Morganton after leaving our church 3 years ago, living quietly in a small apartment near the town center. The police agreed to bring her in for questioning based on my suspicions about her involvement. The confrontation with Celeste shattered my first theory completely. When Detective Albright showed her the photographs that had destroyed my reputation, her reaction was immediate and authentic. She gasped in horror, covered her mouth with her hands, and began crying tears that seemed genuine and spontaneous. Celeste swore on her mother's grave that she had never told another soul about our affair. She claimed that seeing those photographs was the first time she had thought about our relationship in years. Her shock and distress felt real, not like the performance of someone trying to cover up their own guilt. But Detective Albright still took her into custody for further questioning. As I watched her being led away in handcuffs, doubt crept into my mind about whether I had been wrong to suspect her. Her tears and protestations of innocence had seemed completely genuine to my experienced eye. If Celeste was not my blackmailer, then who could have known about our affair from 3 years ago? The secret had been buried so deep that even my own wife had never suspected anything. Someone else must have discovered our relationship through careful investigation or pure accident. My mind turned to other possible suspects within the church community. Deacon Silas had always disapproved of my more progressive approach to ministry and had publicly disagreed with several of my budget decisions over the years. His rigid moral standards and personal grievances against me made him an attractive suspect for this kind of vengeful attack. I began watching Deacon Silas more carefully, looking for signs of guilt or satisfaction in his behavior following my downfall. He had been notably absent from the emergency board meeting where I was removed from pastoral duties. Some church members mentioned that he seemed unusually pleased about the change in leadership. Then an anonymous tip led me to consider another possibility entirely. Someone called Detective Albright to suggest that we investigate Miss Annalise Thorne, a wealthy widow who had been one of the church's most generous donors for many years. Her financial contributions had mysteriously decreased in recent months, possibly indicating some kind of falling out with church leadership. Miss Thorne lived in a large estate on the outskirts of Waynesville, rarely appearing in public except for Sunday worship services. Her reclusive nature and substantial wealth made her seem capable of orchestrating an elaborate blackmail scheme. Perhaps she felt slighted by some pastoral decision I had made and wanted revenge. The more I considered these possibilities, the more confused I became about the blackmailer's true identity. Each suspect had potential motives, but none of them felt quite right when I examined the evidence more closely. The timing and execution of the blackmail felt too personal and too perfectly calculated for a simple revenge plot. I didn't know it then, but my investigation was about to take me down a path that would challenge everything I thought I knew about trust, desperation, and the lengths people will go to protect the ones they love most. The real blackmailer was hiding in plain sight, wearing a mask of friendship and concern while planning my destruction from within my own inner circle. My desperate search through false leads and dead ends finally brought me back to where it all began. I returned to my former study in the church, now empty and stripped of my personal belongings. Something kept drawing me back to examine those leaked photographs one more time, not for the painful memories they contained, but for clues I might have missed. I studied every detail of those images and the video with the intensity of a detective examining evidence at a crime scene. The angle of the camera, the lighting in the room, the background details that might reveal where the photographer had been hiding. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold with realization. In one blurry corner of a photograph, barely visible unless you knew exactly what to look for, sat my small porcelain shepherd figurine. But the angle from which it was captured told a story that changed everything I thought I knew about my blackmailer's identity. The camera had been positioned in a very specific location above my desk, hidden in a small space that only a few people even knew existed. This wasn't a random hiding spot that any intruder could have discovered. This was a carefully chosen location that required intimate knowledge of my study's layout and recent renovations. Only one person had insisted on overseeing the placement of new shelves in my study room, which was coincidentally during the time that my brief affair with Celeste began. Elder Caldwell had personally supervised every detail of that renovation project, making jokes about how well certain spaces could be hidden from view. At the time, I had thought his comments were innocent observations about craftsmanship and design. Now I realized that Elder Caldwell could probably be behind all of this, waiting patiently for the right moment to spring it. He must have installed the hidden camera during the renovation and captured evidence of my affair when it happened. Then, he had waited 3 long years to use that evidence against me, timing his attack for maximum destruction. But why would Elder Caldwell, a man I trusted completely, orchestrate such an elaborate scheme to destroy my life and reputation? What could possibly motivate someone I considered a close friend to plan my downfall with such careful attention to detail? The answer came when I discussed this new lead and findings with Detective Albright. Detective Albright didn't rush the process. Instead, he invited Elder Caldwell and carefully questioned him over several sessions, using a calm but strategic approach, asking the same questions in different ways, noting every hesitation, every shift in his story. As suspicions grew, Detective Albright obtained warrants to dig into Caldwell's personal finances. What he found painted a clear picture: overdue medical bills and multiple accounts under different names. At the same time, a forensic analyst examined the leaked photos and discovered hidden metadata, digital fingerprints that trace back to a burner phone purchased just blocks from Caldwell's neighborhood. With all this mounting evidence, Albright confronted Caldwell directly. That's when he broke, tears streaming as he confessed, explaining it was all done out of desperation to save his terminally ill daughter, whom no one even knew was sick. Elder Caldwell's daughter, Briar, had been battling a rare and aggressive form of cancer for several years. Her medical treatments were experimental and extremely expensive, far beyond what any normal insurance plan would cover. Caldwell had exhausted his retirement savings, sold family possessions, and borrowed money from every available source to pay for Briar's care. The medical bills were crushing his family financially, but he was willing to do anything to save his only daughter's life. The church's accounts contained the money he desperately needed, but he couldn't simply steal from the congregation without a cover story. My affair had given him the perfect opportunity to justify taking church funds. His original plan was to blackmail me into transferring the money, making it look like I had stolen from the church to pay off a blackmailer. If I had given in to his demands, he would have gotten the money he needed while keeping his own reputation intact. When I chose confession over theft, Caldwell realized his plan wasn't going to work as intended. So he released the photographs anyway, not for revenge, but because he was running out of time to save his daughter. He hoped that destroying my reputation would create enough chaos in the church leadership to give him opportunities to access the funds through other means. Through his tears, he explained how watching his daughter suffer had driven him to desperate measures he never thought himself capable of. He had betrayed our friendship, destroyed my reputation, and schemed ways to steal from our church because he couldn't bear the thought of losing Briar when money might save her life. The police arrested Elder Caldwell that same afternoon. The church board offered to reinstate me once they learned the truth about the blackmail scheme, but I declined their invitation to return. My true redemption wasn't going to come from reclaiming a pulpit or restoring my public reputation. Looking back now, I realized that discovering Elder Caldwell's betrayal taught me something more valuable than 20 years of ministry ever had. Sometimes the people we trust most are fighting battles we know nothing about, and desperation can turn even good people into our worst enemies. The real tragedy wasn't what Elder Caldwell did to me, but what his daughter's illness had done to him. A father's love had twisted into something destructive and criminal, destroying multiple lives in a desperate attempt to save just one. That kind of moral complexity doesn't have easy answers or comfortable solutions. This painful experience taught me several important lessons that might help you avoid similar heartbreak in your own life. Let me share 4 of them with you. 1. Some secret can't stay hidden forever. Some secrets always have a way of surfacing eventually, no matter how deeply we try to bury them. The affair I thought was safely hidden for 10 years became the weapon that destroyed my reputation. When we make mistakes, it's better to confess them honestly rather than live in fear of eventual exposure. 2. Desperate people do desperate things. Desperate people are capable of actions that seem completely out of character for who we think they are. Elder Caldwell was a man I trusted completely, but his daughter's illness pushed him to betray that trust in ways I never could have imagined. We should be compassionate toward people facing impossible situations while still protecting ourselves from potential harm. 3. Forgiveness doesn't always mean restoration. Forgiveness doesn't always mean restoration to the way things were before. I forgave Elder Caldwell for what he did to me and my family, but I also recognize that some relationships can't be rebuilt after such deep betrayal. Sometimes the healthiest choice is to forgive from a distance and move forward separately. 4. Redemption comes from making peace. True redemption comes from making peace with the people who matter most to us, not from public recognition or professional success. My wife and children's forgiveness meant more to me than any congregation's applause ever could have. Comment below and tell me what part of this story resonated most with you. If you want to hear more stories like this one, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, keep living with grace and purpose.